Alistair, thank you. I'd like to bring in our two growers now. Peter Duggan, first of all, grape grower in the Riverland, chairman of Renmark Irrigation Trust. He's also on the board of the South Australian Murray-Darling Basin Natural Resource Management Board and director of the National Irrigators Council. And Nigel Bleschke. Nigel is a viticulturalist from Torbreck Vintners in the Barossa and previously was at Peter Lehman Wines from 2008 to 2015. Peter, can I ask you first to tell us just a little bit about, where you're from, and then how you react to all of this, and what your plans are?
Well, you don't want much, do you, Ticky? Born and bred in Renmark, went overseas. Was actually working for a company called Vintage Cellars, and I can see an old previous boss down the front here some years ago. About 98 I went back to Renmark because you couldn't help but make a fortune selling something with a grape skin on it. Ever since then it's gone downhill. Got involved in water politics, got elected to the board, and before you know it you're standing in front of the raging crowds trying to explain what's going on to a lot of people. Because in a nutshell, I think when unbundling came along, there was a national water initiative which led to that. Yeah. The states then had to comply with the federal government. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan came along. All the time that was going on, grape prices were going south in our area of town. The Australian dollar was going north.
So hearing what you've just heard now about going forward, does that affect your planning? I mean, how are you planning your potential upside and covering your downside?
I just ran into one of my neighbours before and he said, "How's your almond property going?" So that's something...
Is it that bad?
Yes and no. The unknown is probably the biggest thing that people are trying to deal with. Unknown water markets, unknown commodity prices, unknown future. And I think there's a lot of banks that are probably wary at the moment and looking at people. Luckily, because of unbundling, I think a lot of water's been sold to reduce debt and or improve equity. There's only so much water people have to sell, and then they, as Will earlier alluded to, you go into the market for water and you're a price taker. Right now, if you're growing grapes and it's below the cost of production, you probably don't want to be buying water on top of that. So, okay. Yeah, it's scary.
Nigel, can I ask you, what's your feeling hearing this, and how are you placed going forward?
I guess I bring a Barossa-centric view to the water. We have a couple of schemes that we can access. The Barossa Infrastructure Scheme, which is a private scheme that's brought water into the Barossa.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's it.
So, and also South Australian water system, so we can actually buy for the mains water. Both schemes, there's limited water, so water for us is a big issue.
Yeah, and do you share the same worries about the power of nuts and almonds? So the reason I say that is because I was interested, fellas, in your confidence about cotton taking over. I mean, I'm old enough to know that cotton can just disappear overnight if the global prices go south, but you kind of assume it's here to stay. Perhaps back. If I could jump just for a moment to ask perhaps Waterfind about cotton.
Well, I think we've seen industries, have periods of growth and contraction, and certainly, cotton. It's really at the moment the change in varieties, the change in practices have enabled cotton to actually expand into new areas. So the biggest change is not so much that cotton is, certainly price is strong and that helps support development, but at the moment it's actually been the capability to bring cotton into the Murrumbidgee and to bring it into an area that, in comparison to where they're coming from, the northern New South Wales and into Queensland, the water price, the price that they're paying is significantly less. So it's significantly cheaper for them to operate, and they're getting really outstanding quality crops.
All right, Nigel, back to you. So how are you looking at your water plan?
Certainly, we're looking at securing water, getting water on property, and also looking very much at the way we manage our vines. Being a premium region, we're looking at, obviously, quality is a big issue for us. So we're looking at a lot of, soil management, trying to use the water as most efficiently as we can. But I guess one of the big things is looking at trying to get some on-farm storage. going to be very important going forward because the schemes are allocated. There's no more water available at this point.
Yeah. Is that easy and permissible to get on-farm storage?
You certainly have to have land available to do it, so no, it's not easy. And it's not available to every grower, so water is a big issue.
All right, all right. I noticed that that there was not much talk about stranded assets, and I wonder whether this is going to become a bigger issue. Perhaps I could ask Tim Goods about that. Do you see a concern with stranded assets as water moves around, looking at it from a government point of view?
Well, certainly we understand that there are, and I think it's kind of known as the Swiss cheese effect, as people exercise their right to sell their asset, and we saw the result in during the drought when people sort of sold up, and it creates a number of concerns, particularly for Peter's other hat, his non-growing hat, around the costs of managing systems remaining the same with fewer people participating. So he might have a greater insight into the actual impacts.
Peter?
there.
Yeah, it is a problem. We had about 8% of our water disappeared in the small block irrigator exit buyback. That adds up. We had termination fees, which we had to run through the ACCC effectively to have it approved, but it was approved. That gave us about 10 years of breathing space, and we're into the 7th year now. So that will really bite in about 3 years' time. Basically, the fixed costs on everything are going up. Most importantly, electricity. Electricity is absolutely killing farming in Australia.
So going back to Professor Garno this morning, do you see a lot of interest amongst growers looking at trying to put in their own energy, off-grid?
We do. We've actually got a small entrepreneur in Renmark who's actively going around talking to these guys, looking at putting up solar power as a side income or an alternative income on those properties, non-water reliant being the main attraction.
What about water prices from some growers that are lucky enough to be literally on the Murray are in one situation. What about those growers? There must be some who are taking water from state water. The prices are extraordinarily high. Who should I ask about that?
I can answer that. It's about $3,360 a megalitre for South Australian mains water. And in certain cases, my own vineyard, that's all I can access.
So presumably the politicians are well aware of the strains that is putting on growers?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So anything being done about it, positively or negatively? And if things get much drier, will those prices go up as well? Are they pressured as well?
I was going to say we're still subject to the Murray allocation. So in the last drought, our allocations were cut back with that SA water. So we're part of the water market, so we're affected by those just as much as the Murray irrigators. So yeah, that's definitely
All right. Well, can I ask you about the water bank, the government, the environmental water bank, and how you see that being used going forward, and indeed how you see the tensions more broadly between cities? I mean, we've just heard the Broken Hill announcement, obviously. Do you see that becoming a much bigger problem for existing water holders?
We saw the percentages of allocation to the environment there. The vast bulk of the consumptive pool is still available for agricultural use, but it is a significant impact. That's a government policy decision that reflects decisions that have been taken by elected officials.
But presumably the idea with the environment is that they buy and sell at a good time for irrigators in terms of how it's supposed to work.
Oh, look, yes and no. I think, Tiki, there's a common perception that it's counter-cyclical, and when it's dry, the environment doesn't need it, and therefore the environment will be selling allocations to irrigators at that time. The environment's receiving allocations in line with its entitlements, as is everyone else. So when it's dry and everyone's looking for allocation, well, the environment allocation is low also. So with that limited amount of water that they have at that time, they may well be looking to protect assets that are under stress. And so I don't think we'll see the opportunities for counter-cyclical trade as much as you might. But there will be more of that as the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder matures into its role, and it's still quite young. So I think there's some way for that to play out. You mentioned Broken Hill. It comes back to your point about stranded assets, the pricing of water through SA Water's assets. They won't come down. They shouldn't by political decision making because they're not made by politicians. They're made by SA Water in line with guidance provided by an independent economic regulator. It reflects the cost of providing water through infrastructure. Infrastructure provision is water provision is an infrastructure business. And the big question is, do we have the willingness and ability to pay for water based on what it costs to get? And there's a real issue there about government subsidies into infrastructure. Can the 18,000 people of Broken Hill continue to pay over the asset life cycle the operations and maintenance cost of a $500 million pipeline? Well, clearly no. But the government will pump the money into it, as they've pumped $7 or $8 billion into the basin.
Senator Ruston, obviously, this has been discussed and she's supporting it, but was there a mention of a cost-benefit analysis?
I think you would be doing very well as an economist if you could get a positive benefit-cost ratio out of providing a $500 million pipeline to service 18,000 people.
Is that likely to impact people in South Australia at all?
The volume of water that comes through that pipeline is, I think, about 10 gigalitres a year. That won't have a material impact on water availability in South Australia.
Okay, all right. It's more the precedent that it sets, perhaps.
Well, the precedent that it follows in terms of $7 or $8 billion of Australian government money into irrigation infrastructure through the basin.
Okay.
If you want to talk about stranded assets, it's a valid question, but we're still putting money into infrastructure. $2 billion into Northern Victoria, and I pointed to the adjustment pressures that we'll see in Northern Victoria.
Peter, tough question, but Will painted this sort of perfect storm that we could be heading for, with other players coming in, other agricultural producers coming in, and things getting drier, water prices going up. Are we going to see a lot of people bailing out? And how easy is it to get off a property and do something else once you're in, boots and all?
Difficult. The value of the properties in the Riverland is pretty much directly related to the commodity prices. As they crash, the return on investment goes down with it, so the value drops. If you then sell the water off the land, you basically got a dry land farm with something on it that nobody wants, especially if it's wine grapes and it's not the right varieties on top of that. It's a disaster.
So when you hear this sort of information about the water outlook coming through, what do you think people should be doing if at the moment we've had this great expansion phase? Should they be beginning to sell down a little bit now, or what should be happening?
I think people, every individual is just that. They're all different. There are small growers that just have no issues, even though they're running at a loss because they just have no debt, they have off-farm income. It's a lifestyle for them. You can't tell them what to do, they're quite happy. If you're doing it as a business though, it's entirely different. There will be pressure from banks if you owe money. If you're trying to reposition yourself through one of the programs like the 3IP that's just been running, 2 years ago you would have made a decision to possibly adopt more risk, diversify your portfolio, own less water, value add what you had, reposition your business, plant new varieties or whatever. And now suddenly we've gone into a drought from 100% to 36%. So that decision 2 years ago now suddenly looks interesting.
Okay.
So it's a volatile place to be.
And finally, if I could ask Nigel, what if there is a big dry? Presumably that'll make a lot of difference to the Riverland. Is there a difference between what impact that has on you guys in terms of prices and demand and that sort of?
It'll definitely has impacts on yield. Certainly the price, that which then I reflected in price in terms of supply and demand for us. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of vignerons at the moment. The pricing in the Barossa is quite good, but if the pricing comes back in the next few years, the same pressures are going to hit growers there. The cost of water is going to really make their businesses unviable, and as it's done in the past.
All right, well, it's a fascinating space. I thank you all for your views and all the information that you've shared with us. Please thank our panel very much indeed. And stay there.